Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I'm here to share with you my monthly reflections. Today we're going to take a look at the decks I worked with in July and talk about some other fun things that have been going on. So for the last few months, every month, I've been trying to use one main tarot deck. So really diving into that deck, using it for all of my base readings. And of course, I incorporate some other tarot decks along the way, but I was trying to really focus in on one deck and get to know it really well. So for the month of July, I was working with the Chrysalis Tarot. And this is a deck that I've actually worked with many times before. However, I've always worked with it much more intuitively, and I've never really dove into the book. So the deck comes with a little white book, which I actually think is really wonderful, and I found to be more useful than the big book, actually. It does have a larger book that you can buy separately, and I really enjoyed the introductory information in this book. I really enjoyed hearing about how the deck came about. I enjoyed hearing or reading about the structure of the deck, about some of the themes that are running through this deck, and I thought that was really quite interesting. And as far as like really getting into or understanding where this deck is coming from and how it's approaching the tarot, I think this book was really wonderful for that, for a base knowledge, to really dive into the book, to really dive into the structure of the deck, because this deck does have a little bit of a different structure. So for that was really wonderful. I really enjoyed reading the book. The write-ups for each card, I liked seeing about where the artwork came from, the inspiration and intention behind it. And then we have the expanded information with kind of more of an expansion of what we find in the guidebook. However, I will say that as much as I enjoyed this, and it's kind of like a, primer to working with this deck, I actually found that in practice, the little white book actually worked much better for me. The write-ups in the little white book were much more concise. It really kind of got to the heart of the matter, where sometimes I felt like the descriptions in the larger guidebook kind of wandered a little bit and didn't necessarily give you the information that you needed in terms of using these cards in a reading. I felt like this was more of a great primer or background for this deck, and then the little white book was really where I ended up kind of pulling the majority of my information from. I did really try to work with just this book in terms of actually working with it in terms of my reading, so pulling my cards and then looking up definitions in this book, looking up the meanings in this book. But I just found that after a while, like it was almost like too much. It was overwhelming, and I ended up just pulling this back out and going back to it again to really dive into those ideas and those interpretations of the deck. So with the major arcana, most of the time the story or the illustration, the figure in it really did kind of make sense for the overall archetype of the deck. However, I really struggled with these court cards. The court cards have all been changed, and as I don't read court cards as people, that was really quite a struggle for me. I really do love this artwork. Again, we can see here another major that really does, track quite well. Really, for me, where this deck shines is in the minors. I love the way the minors are depicted, although I do have to say that sometimes I would forget because the suit associations have changed. And I wrote it in my journal, actually, so that I could go back and look, because sometimes I struggled with some of the associations, really kind of the spiral and the stones, because see here as we look at this 7 of spirals, we have this bear in the cave, and to me that's a very earthy kind of imagery, even though we have the spiral here, the 7 spirals on the cage. Like I get the association, I understand that. However, just on first glance of this image, it looks very earthy to me, and I immediately think pentacles. And so that was kind of a tripping up point for me. In working with this deck, I really didn't have too much trouble with the mirror suit. That is the suit of cups or emotion. Again, it was really these court cards that I struggled with. The scrolls, for the most part, I was able to remember that those are air. Sometimes, like this one, when we see this spiral, this to me speaks very much of that fiery energy. And so for me, it's not hard for me to make the leap from spiral to wands to fire. And that works quite well. But some of them were a little bit harder for me to look at. Here's a good example of 8 of stones, right? I look at that and I definitely see pentacles, and I think that works really wonderful. But there were occasions where I'm like, I can't really remember what the association is, and the artwork kind of throws me a little bit in terms of what suit it is. And it was really, I think, just the pentacles or the spirals and the stones in this deck, because they do kind of have a little bit of a similar feel to them. They're both fairly earthy. The scrolls and the mirrors both have like very distinct backgrounds. So the scrolls have a very purpley background and the mirrors have a very blue background. And so that was very helpful to look at it and know that, you know, this is a scroll. It's definitely got a purple undertone, and that I was able to kind of pick those out a little bit better. But same with the mirrors and the blue. But in some of them, I kind of struggled with it. And to be perfectly honest, the court cards really threw me for a loop in this deck. And I say that because even though I have worked with this deck before, I've never worked with it in terms of the book. And so I think that trying to tie in these particular court cards in with their story in the book, and it's just not really the way that I read the court cards. I don't read them as people, so that really was kind of difficult for me, and I really struggled with knowing who was who and what was what in this deck in terms of the court cards. Now, when I've previously used this deck, it really hasn't been a big deal because I've worked with it very intuitively. Even though I kept the titles on the cards, so that I would know, particularly for the majors, you know, like this is the death card, understanding, you know, the story and having read the information in the guidebook on the story, particularly where the majors are concerned, was very helpful. And I think that definitely added to my overall understanding of the cards. However, when it came to actually working with them, I found that trying to just go off the book and really kind of ignoring my own intuition really just wasn't working for me. And I think that's because this is a deck that I've primarily read intuitively, because it's really all about this artwork for me. I love the artwork. If I don't really read it in terms of it being like the page of mirrors here, if I read it more in terms of it being a healer energy, that actually worked better for me. But I think in trying to work with the book, like I kind of shot myself in the foot there. I think I got a little too into the book and I wasn't allowing my intuition to come through enough. And that really hindered my work with this deck. In fact, it hindered it to the point where I kind of about halfway through the month was like, I really don't want to work with this deck anymore. The court cards, like I feel like I got a court card every reading. This deck really challenged me in that way. And it wasn't really a deck that I had thought to be a challenging deck beforehand, because I'd always just read it really intuitively. For me, this deck is all about this artwork. I love this artwork, and I've thought about taking it down borderless many times. I have seen it borderless. It looks beautiful. The only reason I haven't, honestly, is because I spent a lot of time edging this deck. It has multiple layers on it, and I just haven't wanted to kind of like chop that off yet. But I think after this experience, I've kind of come to the realization that I kind of need to take it down borderless so that I'm not distracted by all the extra titles and names and stuff, because I found that kind of pulled me away from my readings. And well, I really enjoyed the big book. I really enjoyed reading the introductory information, and knowing the stories behind the major arcana was really I think really added a whole nother layer to my readings. I highly recommend reading it as like a primer to using this deck. But when it came down to actually using the deck and then having a resource material, I found that the Little White Book was actually much more helpful. So for my self-care readings, which are my readings I do pretty much every Sunday, the two primary decks I used were the Land Sky Oracle and the White Sage Tarot. And these are both by Teresa Hutch, and these are two of my favorite decks. particularly to use for self-care readings or for those mindful moments. For me, these decks just have a very calming energy and I really enjoy working with them. So how I kind of worked with these was I pulled my Land Sky Oracle as kind of like a base oracle message for the week. And then I used actually primarily the prompts from my self-care Sunday readings. You can find those on my Instagram every week too, to pull from my White Sage Tarot. And these little cards, they just, they work so beautifully together. I mean, I love when I can use decks from the, you know, from the same creator, because they just seem to work so beautifully together. I really love both of these decks. They make for wonderful self-care readings. And I realized that besides like my rune cards, which we're going to see here in a moment, this was the only oracle deck that I used throughout this whole month. And I guess I'm just not really feeling it with the oracle right this 5 minutes. So, you know, that's okay. We're going with it. I really like the little affirmations that are in the guidebook for the Land Sky Oracle. And I found that they were really seemed to be on point with my reading. They really helped, kind of felt like they gave like a little bit of heart and soul to my readings. And I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it because it sounds kind of weird that way. But it was like this was kind of the heart of the message. And then the White Sage Tarot, the reading that I did, which was always a 3-card reading, really kind of expanded on that message. And they worked really beautiful for that. I mean, look at this. Clear quartz with clarity and then death. How beautiful are those together? I know I haven't been showing a lot of tarot oracle combos lately. I do want to do a series on it. But these two just, I mean, because I think, you know, very similar artwork, very similar energy for me. They are by the same creator. I think they just work really lovely together. And I really love the messages that they have together. So here we have Kali with Fierce Love and the Queen of Swords. That's just kind of perfect. Kind of perfect. And I just really love this little deck. It is one of my favorites. I tend to take it places with me. It kind of tends to be like my self-care, my mindful moment deck, and I really love that about it. So definitely two of my favorite decks to work with, and I definitely enjoyed working with them in terms of my self-care Sunday practice. So another deck that I worked with this month was the Mystical Goddesses Tarot, and this is the little deck that I have trimmed. There is a mod with me on my channel. And I've pretty much taken it down to like an intuitive oracle more than a tarot, because I'm finding that the way that I work with this deck is definitely more like an oracle, as in, you know, pulling a card or two and then getting my message based off the imagery that I'm seeing. And that has worked really well for me. I've really enjoyed this. This is the deck that I did the Mod Podge on the side to keep the blue in place. And so it's been about a month or so, I think, since I did that. So I thought I'd just give a quick update. It still shuffles beautifully. The blue is staying in place really well. I'm getting no transfer on my hands. And I just, yeah, I really love working with this little deck. I felt kind of called to pull from it quite often throughout July. It has a great kind of summery energy, I think. And it also has a... that card came up for me several times. It has a beautiful look and feel to it. I really enjoy the artwork. I really enjoy the intuitive hits that I get from the artwork. And, you know, of course, I have cut all of the titles off. So the symbols have remained down in the corners, which is really kind of nice because I can get the astrological associations if I wanted to. But I just find that this deck for me reads beautifully, intuitively, and I just really haven't found that I've needed to really pull in the book. There are some of these goddesses, you know, that I definitely recognize when they come up, and some of the images, they just, you know, really it's just the artwork. It's how the artwork speaks to me, and like I said, I've used this more of as an oracle than anything else, and it really gave me some powerful messages over the month, and I really enjoyed working with it. You know, sometimes when I do the mods, sometimes I get questions of, you know, do you still like it? Does it still work for you? Particularly when I do something like take all the border off and turn it into, you know, an intuitive deck. I get a lot of questions about, well, how do you work with it now? And it depends on the deck. For this one, I work with it very intuitively, as if it's still, as if it's an oracle deck is really how I work with it. And that seems to actually work really well for me. Now, in addition to that deck, I also did a couple of readings with my little first edition Star Tarot. I have the second edition. I did a mod with me on my channel. I did a walkthrough. And I'm still just so attached to this one. I really, to be perfectly honest, haven't gone back to my second edition at all. Because this one is just, I don't know, I'm attached to it. I put a lot of effort into trimming it. Not that I didn't in the other one. That one actually took quite a bit of effort too. And this one is not like, it's pre-measurement days for me. So it's not perfectly trimmed. I don't really care for the edging. I did it in silver, metallic Sharpie, and it's kind of coming off in a lot of different places, and the backs are way prettier on the second edition, but this is just one of my favorites. It's got that super glossy cardstock, but after a while, and I've mentioned this I think before on my channel, after a while the stickiness fades and it just kind of has this great feel to it. So I used that one quite a few times, and I'll just kind of show you here in a minute. Because the other one that I used in conjunction with these two decks is my trimmed Tarot of the She. And this is upside down and one of my favorite decks. I absolutely love this deck. This deck it's so primal. It's so energetic. I get such great messages from this deck. And this is another one that I read almost exclusively intuitively. So let's just flip them around, because I definitely did a few readings with these three decks together, and that just worked really beautifully. I love the messages that I got. I read with the Mystical Goddess kind of more intuitively, the Star Tarot more as like a tarot, and then the Tarot of the She more intuitively. So I kind of had like my base message from the Star Tarot, and then kind of my intuitive expansion through the Mystical Goddess and through the Tarot of the She. And I think these decks just worked really well together. In my mind, this is a little like, using a tarot with two oracles. Just because of the way that I work with these two decks is definitely more intuitive, whereas this deck, I definitely work with it as a tarot. The tarot structure is definitely a part of the reading for me. And with the other two decks, it's more about the intuitive hits, more about what the artwork is telling me than necessarily what the tarot associations are. So I think that's really beautiful. I love these decks together. These two decks I read with quite frequently together. They are two of my favorite decks to work with for readings together. And then adding this new Mystical Goddess Tarot just really added a new lovely layer to it. So another deck that I worked with throughout the month of July was the Rune Spirals deck and guidebook by our very own Nina at Shuffled Tarot. And this really has been very instrumental in me learning the runes. The way that Nina has depicted these cards has really helped me kind of solidify my understanding of the runes as we've been working with them. And the guidebook that she's written is just absolutely wonderful. The write-ups, she includes a little bit of the story about them and some keywords and the associations that she uses. And it's just so well written and easy to digest that sometimes when I get a little bit overwhelmed by some of my other rune resources, some of my other bigger books, like I kind of just feel like I can come to Nina's book and be like, okay, like now let's try to connect all that so that I can make sense of it. And that really has been very helpful. This guidebook has really traveled around with my rune journal as well. The depictions are really what's been key to helping me understand some things. But I am actually really looking forward to using it in terms of reading. So right now it's functioning as a study deck for me, but soon here it will also be functioning as a reading deck for me too. And I'm really excited to start that and to give that a try. Nina just did a really wonderful job on this little deck and guidebook, and I'm really glad that I have it for this rune study, because it's actually been sometimes when I get a little overwhelmed by everything else, like I can kind of come to this and kind of like, okay, let's just like take it down a notch. Let's just take a breath and see what Nina has to say, because sometimes that just really clicks for me more than some of the stuff that's written in some of those gigantic books that I have. So now that we've taken a look at some of the decks that I used throughout July, I just thought we'd touch base and I'd share a couple of the other exciting things that have happened throughout the month. So one of the big things that has been going on in terms of my personal practice and things I've been working on has been the Boho Rune Study Group, which I am hosting along with Lisa from Supportive Tarot. So we're hosting this joint study group, and it's primarily taking place on Facebook. However, we've also been doing a live chat every other Saturday over on Lisa's channel, and that has been really fun, and I have really enjoyed working with the runes. And in particular, I've really enjoyed the kind of group study environment, because it really allows us to share resources, to share thoughts and ideas. And some of my most important aha moments that have come about when working with the runes, or really learning the runes from the first time, have really been through this group. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to everybody who's in the rune group, because you guys have all been amazing, and it's been so much fun to work with everybody and kind of share this rune adventure together. So that has been really wonderful, and I've really enjoyed the live chats with Lisa. It's been really fun to collaborate on this particular project as well. And speaking of Lisa, one of the other really exciting things that kind of happened in July was that Lisa released her new book, The Self-Worth Path. And this I'm really excited about, because I got to actually help Lisa design this book. So this has been a lot of fun. We worked together to get her book created, get it into print for her. We did the ebook together as well. And I really enjoyed working with her. It's a wonderful book. I also got, of course, the opportunity to read it. And there were so many aha moments in that too, that I was like, oh, this is such wonderful information. And if you haven't picked up a copy yet, I highly recommend it. It's really, really good. Speaking of collaborations, also had a couple of really fun ones this month on the channel. In particular, I do want to do a special shout out for the Wizards Tarot, because for that collaboration, I got to work with Barbara Moore, and she's really wonderful to work with. So that was really exciting. That was kind of a highlight for me for the month. I mean, in terms of all of this kind of stuff that I have going on. Other than that, things have pretty much been same old around here, given the current circumstances in the world. And I've been trying to do some work on my other channel as well. That one's a little bit more, slow to grow, because my main focus is definitely this channel, but I do have a lot of things in store for that one as well. So if you like kind of the more journally crafty things, pop on over there and check that one out. So I hope you all had a wonderful July, and I wish you all many blessings moving into August. Thank you for joining me today. You will find links for the decks featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.